All right, welcome to Unit 3, first video. Today we're going to be getting into the study of U.S. history. Give me one second here. So let me give you a little introduction here. So a building cannot be stronger than its foundation. This statement is certainly true of architecture, but it's also true of our study of history. Every telling of history, whether by a friend or a college professor, is based on a number of foundation stones. And so we're going to be looking at today the foundational concepts that form the basis of this study of history. One foundation is the method that a historian uses to understand the past. A faulty approach to doing historical research will lead to faulty conclusions. So another foundation is the world's earliest events. And these events are foundational because they form the bedrock on which all the rest of history is built. So, what is the historian's task? Well, history is the inquiry into what has happened in the past and why it has happened. But how do historians know what happened in the past? Historians act a lot like detectives. They search for clues and they hope that this will unlock the secrets of the past. These clues are resources, like they're kind of like raw materials for historical study. And by collecting them, analyzing, and then interpreting the materials, the historians can produce an account of the past that others may use. So the resources that historians use are basically boiled down into two different kinds. We'll get to those in a second. Let me just make sure I got touch base on everything on the PowerPoint. Okay, artifacts are objects made by man. They give us valuable information about everyday life. So this would be something like an antique, pottery, tools, weapons, clothing, coins. All of those could fall into artifacts. So the historian also derives information from architecture. Often artifacts and architecture go together. So think about when they do like historical digs, like for instance at the pyramids, and they found all the stuff inside the pyramids in Egypt. Those are artifacts, and they give us clues about what life looked like during certain periods of history. Another distinction that we need to make about our two basic kinds of resources are primary and secondary sources. So first, historians examine primary sources. These are records produced during the time period being studied, and they are often produced by the people involved in the events. The second thing that historians study is secondary sources, which are records that explain or interpret primary sources. So obviously, historians prefer to base their work on primary sources, but for some periods, there's not much available. And so what we know is from secondary sources. So primary sources are derived from three basic historical resources: artifacts, oral traditions, and written records. Primary sources equals artifacts, oral traditions, and written records. Secondary sources would be things like an article analyzing the music of Bach, a biography of President Lincoln, a book about the Puritans, essays on Napoleon's military tactics. Those would be examples of secondary sources. Your history book is a secondary source. Sometimes other sources that might come up, church records and maybe a few other things, but pretty much everything falls into primary sources or secondary sources. And for our purposes, they always will. So we need to look at how historians use these resources. Well, first they collect them, and then they're going to evaluate their historical resources. So they examine a given record for its internal consistency and believability. Then they compare the record to others that are similar to it. So what they're doing there when they compare is they're examining their points of agreement and disagreement. And once they know where the strengths are and the weaknesses of what's available to them, the historian is ready for the next step, which we call historical synthesis. So in this step, the historian gathers the useful information that he has and that he's found about his narrative of the past. The narrative he produces constitutes the vast majority of his history, but the historian's task is not yet complete. He must also engage historical interpretation. So just to kind of clarify, historical synthesis is weaving the information together to create a narrative of the past after you've looked at all the resources. So when it comes to historical interpretation, he needs to interpret the events he records by integrating into the account what he believes is the meaning and significance of the event. So historical synthesis is almost like weaving the information together, creating a timeline, and then historical interpretation is giving meaning and significance to the events. So it's going beyond stating what happened, it's explaining why it happened and how it remains significant even to this day. Once the historian has completed all the steps, evaluation, synthesis, and interpretation, his work is ready to be studied and critiqued, and perhaps received by those who desire to know more about the subject that he's worked on. So the historian's philosophy will shape his work. That's true for any type of work across the world. So it's important to note that this whole process of creating history, we actually even in college, you can take a class called historiography, and it's the study of how history is written in every era. So, for instance, if you look at the Revolutionary War, historians have a philosophy and a lens that is different in the industrial era versus our current era about the Revolutionary War. So there's also the study of how historians write history, and that is called historiography. All right. Now we're actually going to be getting into U.S. history a little bit and to have a good foundation and understanding of what happens in U.S. history, we need to start with the Enlightenment. Give me 1 second here.